Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a major ruling that's making headlines across the nation. On September 2nd, 2025, a federal judge declared that the Trump administration's deployment of the National Guard to Los Angeles during immigration enforcement protests was illegal under the Posse Comitatus Act. That's right, Washington's use of military forces in civilian law enforcement just hit a big legal roadblock. What were the circumstances, what did the court decide, and what does this mean for future deployments? Let's get into it. Here's what unfolded back in June 2025. In response to immigration enforcement protests across Southern California, the Trump administration federalized approximately 4,000 National Guard soldiers and 700 Marines and deployed them to Los Angeles. The stated purpose was to protect federal officers and property during protests tied to ICE raids. However, this move sparked immediate backlash from state leadership. California Governor Gavin Newsom and local officials filed a lawsuit, arguing these troops were carrying out policing actions, like setting up perimeters, traffic blockades, and conducting crowd control, activities explicitly forbidden by the Posse Comitatus Act. Fast forward to September 2nd, when U.S. District Judge Charles R. Breyer ruled that the administration willfully violated federal law by using the military in domestic law enforcement roles that went well beyond mere protection of federal staff. So, what's the legal basis for this ruling? The central statute at play is the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which prohibits the use of federal military personnel in domestic law enforcement unless expressly authorized by the Constitution or Congress. In his ruling, Judge Breyer pointed out that the troops were used in crowd control, traffic management, and forming perimeters around federal agents, behavior clearly at odds with the Act's limitations. Notably, the administration hadn't invoked the Insurrection Act, which is one of the few exceptions to the Posse Comitatus Act that would allow such military involvement during insurrections or emergencies. The judge labeled the actions a top-down, systemic effort to deploy the military for purposes of enforcing civilian law, remarkably expansive and legally dubious. Even though some troops remain on the ground, the ruling restricts further law enforcement activity and emphasizes that deployment of military forces in future scenarios would require proper legal pathways. You might be wondering, what's the immediate impact? Judge Breyer did not order the immediate withdrawal of the remaining troops. Instead, the ruling restricts their activities, limiting them to protection of federal property, and granted a temporary stay of the full order until September 12, 2025, giving the administration a window to appeal. So, between now and September 12, the troops can remain deployed but under tighter restrictions. What happens next? Likely, an appeal to the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which previously allowed the initial deployment to stand temporarily. That will be a critical battleground for determining the future scope of presidential authority over domestic military deployments. Governor Newsom has already hailed it as a victory for constitutional limits. On X, he wrote, "Donald Trump loses again. The courts agree. His militarization of our streets and use of the military against U.S. citizens is illegal." Narrator. Now let's zoom out. This isn't just about Los Angeles. The ruling has broader implications. Presidential power and military use. Critics of Trump's broader use of federal forces in places like Washington, D.C., or threats to deploy in cities like Chicago, Baltimore, and New York might see this as a legal rebuke to unchecked executive authority. Limits of federal intervention. The verdict reinforces that if the president wants military involvement in domestic affairs, he must rely on specific legal exceptions, such as the Insurrection Act, and properly justify them. Legal precedent. This ruling may be referenced in future cases involving law enforcement and military overlap, strengthening civilian oversight and constitutional safeguards. Political fallout. The decision draws a bright line between federal overreach and states' rights. For Democratic-led cities and states, it's a win in resisting what they see as militarized governance. Public opinion and polarization. Polling during the initial deployment showed a clear partisan divide. While nearly 70 to 86% of Republicans supported it, only 13% of Democrats did. Independent voters generally opposed it. This ruling is likely to reinforce those divides. So, this moment matters. It's about where the balance lies between national authority and local control, and whether the military should ever be used in domestic law enforcement without clear legal grounds. In summary, as of September 2, 2025, Judge Charles Breyer has ruled that the Trump administration's deployment of National Guard troops to Los Angeles during immigration protests was illegal, citing violations of the Posse Comitatus Act. While some troops remain deployed, their roles are now restricted and the ruling is stayed until September 12, as the administration likely prepares to appeal. This decision reaffirms constitutional limits on military use in civilian contexts and sets a legal milestone. Thanks for watching. Be sure to comment below. What do you make of this ruling? Will it reshape how future administrations deploy the military domestically? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.